Your book calls for a return to principles that made America great, made America successful. What do you think those principles are, and how do we reconnect with those principles in a practical way?
I think the principal documents of this country, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, are probably the greatest political documents that ever have been written by anybody. And I think the only thing that's wrong with this country is that we've strayed from the principles that are in those documents. And I would suggest that the biggest straying is the system was meant to be set up to be fair for everybody. I think most Americans do not want handouts. Most Americans, all they want is a fair deal and a fair shake. I mean, we are a smart, aggressive, hardworking people in general. We recognize unfairness when it exists. And sadly, the people in power and a lot of other folks have figured out ways to make the system unfair.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci, and joining us today is Lawrence Lepard. He's an investment manager, and now he's a best-selling author, exceptional book. The title of the book is The Big Print: What Happened to America and How Sound Money Will Fix It. But before we go into what happened to America, thank you for showing the book. And by the way, I would be showing the book right now, but my book is in my office.
That's all right.
And I'm home. But in any event, Larry, great to have you on. Before we get into the book, I wanted to talk about your background, if you don't mind. So
Sure.
Give us what you did. You told me you were a paper boy, growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Take us through your career, because I think it's
I'll do it quickly, and the book lays a lot of this out. And I did that just to try and establish credibility, that I'm not just some financial nut job. So look, I went to college. I thought I would be an engineer, but I didn't decide to do that. I went more economics, and then I realized I wanted to be in business. I read some of the stuff by Warren Buffett, and I thought, boy, that's what I want to do. I want to figure stuff out and make good investments. And so I went to Wall Street for a couple of years, enjoyed that. Then I went to business school for a couple of years, enjoyed that. And I got in the investment business, and I was fortunate enough at the time. My father was kind of forward thinking, and he said, if I were you, it was like the plastics comment from The Graduate. He said, Larry, if I were you, I'd get involved with this microprocessor stuff. I think it's going to be big. And so I focused on technology investing from the early 80s until really 2006 or 7. And kind of, disk drives, floppy drives, graphics card, all the stuff that PC as it grew up. And then, the internet was probably my biggest area of success, because I was able to identify it in 93, got involved in some of those companies. They did well. And then in 2003, 4, 5, I kind of semi-retired. I spent a lot of time with my kids. I thought that was more important. And then of course, what happened is the GFC came along. And I was just shocked. I don't know where you were or what your reaction to it was when it happened, but it was just like, hang on a second. You mean to tell me they can take interest rates to zero and print trillions of dollars? Oh my goodness. We're going to have hyperinflation, which I was wrong about, dead ass wrong about. But the trend was set in motion. And so I kind of pivoted to sound money. And I realized at that time that, the government was broken, the Federal Reserve was broken, and monetary debasement was going to be a theme that would play itself out in the future. And so I became kind of not an expert, but I read up a lot on monetary debasement. I read all the Austrians, and I kind of realized that, this Keynesian model is just broken. These guys aren't thinking right. So I pivoted into this area, and it's been a rocky ride, because as anyone who's invested in gold and gold stocks knows, this stuff's been volatile, and we haven't been winning all the time. We've had moments where we're winning, but it's been tough. And I have to say, I'm very, very encouraged that Bitcoin came along, because it brought in a whole new category of young people who read Austrian economics, who get it. And what gold tried to do to the Keynesian fiat system, I think Bitcoin's going to do, which is to say we're going to kill it. So and the book is great. That's why I have a lot of young listeners. And so just what Larry's talking about with Austrian economics, basically, it's very simplistic what I'm about to say, but there's a group of people that believe that hard money causes more fiscal prudence, causes more rational decision-making, and is better for lower and middle-class living standards. The Keynesian system that we're going to discuss in a second is about printing money and is about creating lots of deficit spending, which does have, in the Keynesian view, a smoothing effect on recessions. But what it really does, in my opinion, and evident from your book, your opinion, it kicks the can down the road and creates this used nuclear bomb that goes off
that
Correct.
causes
I mean,
this
it's
causes this reckoning. So we're both in the same camp philosophically, but I want to get to that.
yeah.
So you talked about the money printing. Money printing's happened a lot. You've talked about past monetary collapses, Wyoming, Rome, Zimbabwe. I do tell people, Larry, that I am a billionaire, but only in Zimbabwe, where it costs like $10 billion
I am too.
to
In fact,
right to
you're,
right.
you're gonna really like this. Check this out.
Yeah,
I've got
exactly. I got
a
one of those. I got one of
I've
those
got
in
a
my wallet.
$10 trillion Zimbabwe note. I keep it stapled to my wall to remind me.
Right, exactly. So you're a trillionaire. I think
Yeah.
by that definition, I am too. Tell us a little bit about these monetary collapses that happen in the systems that print money, weaken the currency, weaken the confidence in the consumer and the laborer, weaken
Yeah. I mean,
everybody because
I'll try
you
to.
can't catch up. You can't catch up because the money's worth less. You're
Yeah.
making it here, and they're stealing your time and your labor
Yeah. I mean,
at the same time.
and the book lays this out in excruciating detail. Perhaps too much detail for some. You can skip some of the technical chapters, but the bottom line is what's happened here is the government and the Keynesians and the bankers and the financiers have kind of colluded, and they've set up a system they say we need in order to smooth out business cycles, which is not true. And the solution to smoothing out those business cycles is to print money. And every crisis that occurs, the solution is they have one really tool, and that's the money printer, and they print money. And that's just like pouring water in the beer. The beer gets, it's diluted, it's not as valuable, and that's why we all pay higher prices. And so what's unfair about that is that, as in the 2008 example, let's just look at that as kind of the first big one that shocked me. The bankers created a huge credit bubble as a result of very low interest rates that Bernanke had put in place. And when that bubble burst, no banker went to jail. There was no penalty for what they did, and they were all technically bankrupt. So, they got bailed out, and a year later they paid $20 billion of bonuses to themselves. And the people that bailed them out were the taxpayers and all the rest of us. And I remember at the time it created great anger in the country. I mean, we had, as your book, presently pointed out, Occupy Wall Street and some other movements, the Tea Party movement were a result of that. But we really haven't solved that problem. That problem still exists. I mean, we bailed out Silicon Valley Bank. When COVID came along and the basis trade blew up, we bailed out Ken Griffin. And, it's what the financial elites and what the government have figured out a way to do is they kind of hold a gun to our head and say, hey, things have gone wrong. You got to print the money. They get bailed out. And if you don't do that, we're going to put a bullet through your head, or we're going to make sure the ATMs don't work. I mean, that's what, Paulson was down begging Nancy Pelosi for the $700 billion of TARP. He said, if you don't give this to me, the economy is going to fall apart. And so that's always their excuse. And we shouldn't have an economy that's so fragile that we have to pay for their mistakes. And, people wonder, I mean, as you know, a lot of people on the far, the far left say, well, it's greedy corporations that are causing inflation. No, that's not true at all. Supermarkets have very thin profit margins. What's causing inflation is the misbehavior of our government system. And it really does need to be reformed in a big way. And the book talks about that problem, and then it talks about how to solve it. And then there's even a chapter called Policy Response, where I drafted the speech I think the president should give. And we can get out of this mess. I mean, it's not great, but it's not unsolvable. And so the book is pessimistic about what's happened, but very optimistic about where we're going. And I know you're optimistic about it because Bitcoin is really changing the whole thing.
It would
right?
be hard not to be optimistic given everything you and I both know about progress and innovation and technology. And
exactly.
it's still the land of aspirational opportunity for many. But what role would Bitcoin have in all this? Tell us, Lo.
Well, Bitcoin is such an important development, and Saylor and you both did a great job with your book in talking about that. I mean, for thousands and thousands of years, every form of money has been dilutable, which is to say that it can be printed or even more of it can be found. And, before Bitcoin came along, the one form of money that was mildly dilutable was gold. The supply of gold grows every year as we mine more. So, in 50 years, the amount of gold on the planet will double. But having said that, most systems, and we're not even on a gold standard today, we're on fiat standards, and fiat is just continually being diluted. And the fact that there's a 21 million unit hard cap on Bitcoin, we now have a form of money with zero dilution. That's a completely different world than the world that we lived in pre-Bitcoin. I mean, it's like I try and compare it to, ancients. If ancients saw an airplane flying today, they'd say, how is that possible? What is that? It's just a technological innovation that did not exist. There was no way. We've never had a perfectly inelastic commodity, which is to say something where if the price goes up, the supply doesn't change. I can guarantee you if the price of gold goes much, much higher, we're going to mine a lot more gold. But if the price of Bitcoin goes to $1 million, there's still the same amount of Bitcoin. And therefore, that's what led Michael to make his statement, which I just love, which it's going up forever, Laura. And people have to kind of get their head around that. And it's hard to get your head around it. It really is. I know a lot of people who bought it, made money on it, and say, oh gosh, it's got to be near a peak. I'm selling it. and it's one of those assets you just don't sell, in my view.
Well, we've all had those frustrating checkout moments. Maybe the store only takes cash or the system is running slow and you're waiting. It's annoying. And in a city like New York, it just doesn't work. That's why it's such a relief to see so many local businesses using Square. You pull out your phone, you pay in a few seconds, and you get on with your day. It's fast, it's easy, and it just works. What I really like about Square is the flexibility. On the weekends, I'm out with my kids grabbing lunch from a food truck. It's there during the week. I see it at restaurants, retail shops, even online. It fits right in wherever you are. And from a business perspective, Square is built to grow with you. Whether you're just starting out or expanding to your next location, it's simple to set up, it's easy to use, and you can start taking payments right away. No special training, no hassles. Square keeps up so you don't have to slow down. Get everything you need to run and grow your business without any long-term commitments. And why wait? Right now, you can get up to $200 off Square hardware at square.com/go/openbook. That's Square, SQUARE.com/GO/openbook. Run your business smarter with Square. Get started today. So I got to put you on the spot. I hope you don't mind because I put everybody on the spot. So where is Bitcoin? It's 2030.
Yeah.
Let's say the government doesn't adopt the ideas in your book, or let's say they do, either or. But where's Bitcoin?
I don't know. I'd have to go look at the power law for that at that time frame. But I think in 2030, I mean, it's very hard to say, but I could see it anywhere between. I think Michael's number is 13 million a coin. I see it anywhere between 5 million and 25 million a coin. I mean,
5 years from now.
Yeah, million per coin. My view is that what will happen is ultimately we will. I think my kids and certainly my grandkids, your kids and grandkids will price things in satoshis. As for your listeners, the satoshi is the smallest unit within a Bitcoin. Each one Bitcoin is worth 100 million satoshis. So, and satoshi isn't even worth a penny right now, but it's that will change. And I think these other currencies are going to fail. I think it's inevitable. I mean, Safe says it best. It's, when gunpowder came along, fighting with sticks and knives and swords didn't make sense anymore. And it's just a better form of money. I think it's going to replace, and by 2030, it's definitely going to replace all the others. Now, between here and there are going to be volatile periods up and down. It's got all the things related to it. And again, in your book, you did a great job of comparing it to Amazon, which I did in my book as well. Adopting these new things is volatile by definition.
So let's say the end of this year, Bitcoin.
Yeah. If I had to guess, just looking at the charts and doing kind of my financial analyst thing, I think we're at 140 at the end of this year. I mean, we kind of built a very nice base around the 50, 58 area. Well, the absolute bottom of the last correction off of FTX was 15,000. And, it tends to very often go up kind of 10x off its base. And so that would put us at 150,000 per coin. We also kind of went up from 58, we went up to 106, came back into the low 90s, mid 90s, and we formed a flag there, in my view, a technical term for that. And then the next leg up, I think, takes you to 146, 150, kind of this year. It's just a guess. I mean, I don't know, but I'm fairly confident that we'll get there. One of the things that will determine where it goes in the next year or two is the behavior of the government and the Federal Reserve. I mean, the book is called The Big Print. And that's because I think another big print is coming. And we've already had two big prints. We had one in 08 and we had one in 2020. And I think the math suggests that they're going to have to do another one and it's going to be bigger. And so, currencies fail and inflation occurs when the mass of people come to realize, you know what, this system is set up so that they can never stop printing. And as you know, I had a great pod with a guy the other day who grew up in Argentina, and he said, we saw our currency failing in 1990, and my parents would get paid. They'd rush to the grocery store to buy food because they knew a week later it would be more expensive. And that's what a currency failure looks like. We're not there yet, but we're behaving in ways that suggest that we're trending there. And what the policies they pursue, that'll determine what happens.
It's fascinating. It's I don't know how to say this. We've lived it. I didn't think we would see it in our lifetime, but we are seeing it. Michael Milken once said that all sovereign debt defaults.
Yes.
So I said, well, Michael, do you mean also the U.S.? And he got very pushed back. And then he said quietly, well, it's denominated in U.S. dollars, so you could just print the dollar and then you wouldn't default on the debt, right? So we end up paying back our debts with dollars that are worth less
Correct.
than the ones that we borrowed, right? And that's what's been going on forever. And I guess the question I have is, what is the cataclysm? Is it just a slow burn down to the bottom, Larry, or is there some type of cataclysm where people say, okay, whoa, I can't do this anymore?
That's a great question. That goes to kind of, the gradually and then suddenly. I actually think there's an accelerator at some point, that the pattern gets recognized by more and more people. And I've kind of alluded to it as being like a fire in a theater. Some people smell the smoke, and that's us. And we got out and we bought Bitcoin. Everyone else isn't aware there's smoke yet. But eventually, a lot of people become aware quickly. And you're actually seeing the beginnings of this in the acceleration in the price of gold. I mean, I'm a gold guy too. I'm a Bitcoiner through and through. Bitcoin's better than gold, but I still believe in gold. It's analog sound money. And what gold is telling us right now is, this fire, the smoke is getting more intense, right? I mean, gold is up 60% in the past year. It very rarely has done that, very rarely. And so to me, that's the beginning of kind of an alarm. And so to answer your question of does it just gradually burn forever? No, I think we kind of accelerate into a period where it really gets pretty bad and we get really high inflation and people realize there's a crisis. And what I hope is that we have enlightened enough leaders to do a currency reset and say we're going to a sound money standard. Because if we were to go all the way to hyperinflation, if you study those, that's really ugly. It tears a society apart.
Your book calls for a return to principles.
Yeah.
That made America great, made America successful. What do you think those principles are, and how do we reconnect with those principles in a practical way?
I think it's a great question, and I think about it a lot. I think the principal documents of this country, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, are probably the greatest political documents that ever have been written by anybody. And I think the only thing that's wrong with this country is that we've strayed from the principles that are in those documents. And I would suggest that the biggest straying is, it was the system was meant to be set up to be fair for everybody. I think all Americans, nobody in America well, that's not true. Most Americans do not want handouts. Most Americans, all they want is a fair deal and a fair shake. I mean, we are a smart and aggressive, hardworking people in general, but we recognize unfairness when it exists. And sadly, the people in power and a lot of other folks have figured out ways to, make the system unfair. And we've got to return. And the monetary system is a perfect example of that. And the book lays out case after case of that. I mean, there's so many great, for instances, I apologize, somebody's outside blowing leaves off my lawn, but there's so many instances of it. I mean, one of the great ones, I don't know if you were able to read this anecdote, was in 2008, the chairman of one of the big investment banks' wife was able to borrow $220 million from the Federal Reserve, non-recourse, at 0% interest. Now, think about that. The average American, if they want to borrow money, they have to pay a credit card company 25%. And that's unfair in and of itself. I mean, we used to have usury laws where, the max rate on credit cards was, 10 or 11%. And, admittedly, some people couldn't get credit, fine. But, 25%, the mob would blush. So I think the idea of America is a fair system. And I know that my view of government is I don't want really government to do anything except enforce the laws and have courts and have jails. I want psychopaths and criminals and bad people to suffer for their behavior. But other than that, leave me alone. All the other stuff they do, I don't need it. I'm just not interested in it.
You sound like Doug Casey. Remember Doug Casey?
Yeah, I sure do. He's a friend. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I like Doug a lot. He had
Yeah.
that whole libertarian vision that he
Yep.
articulated in crisis investing 45 years ago.
Exactly.
And I tell people, if we had gone with that, you would have tightened everything up. It's very hard to have a war if you can't deficit spend.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and remember, America got in trouble with its first real unilateral war. Yeah. Typically, 250 years of history, U.S., we responded to attacks on the U.S., but we never unilaterally struck anybody. But with the Iraqi war, that was a unilateral strike by the Americans. It turned out that it to be one of the worst decisions that we've made in our history.
I agree.
And it mushroomed the deficit.
I totally agree.
If you had that Doug Casey fiscal discipline, you had to use gold to fight the war. You would have never gotten the war off. Okay, so I'm down to the 5 words. I've got 5 words for you, Larry.
Sure.
We culled these from your book. You are going to react to them. I'm going to say the words, and then you're going to give me a sentence or two, something that comes to your brain real quickly.
Sure.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
I say the monetary system. You say what?
I say fiat currency printed by the Federal Reserve and the government to benefit them and hurt the rest of us.
Right. And it's interesting. So I'm going to add a sentence there and see what you say to it. I would say, in addition to that, it has hurt living standards around the United States for lower.
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely gutted the middle class. And part of the reason I wrote this book was, and we're similar in age, I remember what this country used to be in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It was a much better country. Right. And I've watched people suffer as we, financialized and offshored all our industry. And it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. I mean, all the fentanyl and all the opioid crisis, et cetera. I mean, so many things have gone wrong. And, you and I, we've been, fairly financially comfortable because we've done well. But boy, half this country hasn't had that experience. Half this country has really gotten punched in the face for 20 years. And it's just wrong. I mean, and it's because the system is broken. It's because we're violating the principles in those founding documents. And the way to fix it, this is the part that's the reason I wrote the book. Most people don't understand that it's the monetary system that's doing it. You see these people. I mean, last year, I was watching a red-blue debate, and they were yelling at each other about all kinds of stuff that didn't matter. And I said to myself, these guys are arguing about the color of the drapes and the friggin' house is burning down because of the money system. So it was just crazy. We got to fix the money, right?
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right. I say the words I say the word inflation. You say what?
What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. We do not need inflation. Keynesians would tell you need inflation. You need 2% inflation. And if you don't have 2% inflation, you risk falling into a depression and, everything goes wrong. And that's just a complete and total lie. Because between 1789 and 1913, inflation, with the exception of wars, which you pointed out, and there's a good chart in the book that shows how each war created inflation. But if you didn't have wars, there was no inflation in that time frame. And the country did. I mean, it's not as if our living standards didn't advance enormously between 1789 and 1913. They did.
Okay. Well said. I'm going to leave that. What if I say the word gold?
Gold is analog sound money. It's been sound money for 5,000 years. Its supply is geologically determined. And prior to Bitcoin, it was the best form of money we had. You mentioned earlier countries defaulting, and we'll never default because we can print money. But if you print money to excess and you have hyperinflation, that's really a constructive default in real terms. And even Alan Greenspan admitted that gold is money par excellence. JP Morgan said the same thing. Gold is money, everything else is credit. Gold got us to the point where Bitcoin could be invented. Bitcoin is going to carry us over the finish line to return us to sound money, in my view.
Okay, what about the word Bitcoin?
Bitcoin will go down in history as one of the greatest technological inventions of mankind, in my opinion. similar to the invention of the internet. The distributed nature of the internet and the distributed nature of Bitcoin are changing the world, and they're taking. I mean, in my opinion, I'm spiritual. I know you're Catholic. I am too. They're almost God-given. I mean, we had this corrupt, sclerotic, huge system that could do stupid shit like Iraq because Dick Cheney, wanted to get rich off his Halliburton stock, right? We had that kind of stuff, and decentralizing all of that power and all of those systems is going to save mankind from itself and is going to help the average citizen, and that's most important in my view.
Money.
Money is the most liquid good, according to Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian school. It's a collective illusion, really. It's what we all agree has value, and we use it to exchange with one another, the labor, the fruits of our labor. It should be sound. It should be limited in supply, or else it's not money. That's why, water, sand, certain things can't be money. And most commodities that get used up aren't good money. You need something that doesn't get used up, that has a supply that's either fixed or very controlled in its growth, like gold. And there are two pieces to it, as you and I both know. One is the means of exchange, which is just, you want to do deals and you want to buy things. And the other is you want to be able to save for your future and consume less than you produce, so that, if in the future you need to have something, you've got the savings to do so. And so money should hold its value over time. If it doesn't, it's immoral money. And, it's what we all transact in. And the thing that's so funny is that, the founding fathers knew this. It's in the Constitution. Gold and silver shall be money. They understood it clearly. My book lays it out. There are all kinds of examples. It's in the Bible that sound money is important. And yet, modernity and all our brilliance, we thought, well, Nixon just said, well, let's get rid of this gold standard. We don't need it. It's archaic. And the Keynesians convinced them to do that because it enhanced their power. And it was a mistake. It was a huge mistake. So.
Well, you've been incredible with your time here, and it's a phenomenal book in terms of understanding the monetary system and how to solve some of the global challenges that we're all facing today. The title of the book is the Big Print: What Happened to America and How Sound Money Will Fix It. And I'm very grateful to you. And also, it's a very colorful forward by Max Kaiser.
Yeah,
I do like
I'm very grateful to you, Anthony, just because my mission is to orange pill the world and to try and help people and to spread the word. And, I know the platform you have, the followers you have, the admirers you have, the contacts you have in the media and the press. And so I'll tell you how you can do me a solid back is help me spread the word on this thing. Thank you very much.
There are thousands, if not millions, of unbelievably good singers, talented songwriters. They never break out. They never turn into iconic figures. Yet the two men that you are writing about, they do. What do you think knocked them into the stratosphere? And yet there's thousands of other people that could probably have the scale and range of Billy Joel's voice and perhaps even be as good of a songwriter, couldn't get there.
There's four parts. The first is that they were lucky. Luck is always a factor in the outcome of careers, and it seems impossible to ignore that in their case. The second answer is these were, objectively speaking, unusually talented people. With Joel, his ability to craft a hook, a catchy tune, is demonstrably attractive because he was able to do it over a period of time. And Springsteen, of course, as a writer, as a proto-literary figure. The third part is, again, the moment in which they arrived. They arrived when there was an infrastructure in place where they could succeed. There was a fat and happy record business that was willing to underwrite these guys for a few years and have a few misses until they found their way. That's not there anymore. But the last, and perhaps the most important, is that I think that both of these guys were able to compellingly embody an American myth of upward mobility about which they had some sense of self-consciousness and were able to articulate for a generation of people who could really relate to it on some visceral level. People really responded to that and still do.
So joining us now on Open Book is Jim Cullen. He's a teacher, author, and historian, and he wrote an absolutely outstanding book. It's called Bridge and Tunnel Boys, and I technically am a bridge and tunnel boy, Jim, although I can't sing. It's Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, and the metropolitan sound of the 21st century. And it's just great to have you here. I understand you're also a fellow Tufts alum and a Long Islander. I I had Saul Gittleman on. Hey everyone, it's Anthony Scaramucci here with some straight talk. Let me tell you, we've got 85% of our viewers who haven't hit the subscribe button yet. What's up with that? It hurts. Listen, I made my career by going all in. Right now, only 15% of our viewers are part of our subscribed family. So please take action. This helps us book more amazing guests. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's turn these numbers upside down. Now back to the show.
Oh,
Open book. I don't know if you remember the
of course
provost,
I do.
but
Of course I do.
he just wrote a new book on higher education, and Saul has been a 40-plus year friend of mine, a very big influence on my life. Helped me get into Harvard Law School, and of course, I'm one of the few goys out here on Long Island that knows the difference between a Shagitz and a Shiksa, because I took his course in Yiddish literature. But your book was fascinating to me for a number of different reasons. I've gotten to know Mr. Joel mostly, not Bruce Springsteen as much, although I've met him a few times. These were two icons of my era. I'm a 60-year-old guy. I've also interviewed Bob Spitz, who was the author of the Led Zeppelin book. I don't know if you've read that book, but I would recommend that to you. He joined us on Open Book a few months back. And these guys represent a capsule in time for people of my generation. Of course, I'm more biased towards Billy Joel because I'm a Long Islander, and my buddies that are across the Hudson River are more biased to Bruce Springsteen. But why write this book, sir? Give us a little sense of your background. Tell us why you wrote this book. Why did you pick these two guys and not somebody like a John Bon Jovi as an example?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying that, like you, I'm a bridge and tunnel boy. I was born in Queens. My father was a New York City firefighter. I did leave for a little while in Port Washington, so we overlap there as well.
Oh, wow.
I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I bring that up because I didn't grow up in a house where there were a lot of books or educated people. And instead, my introduction to the wider world was through Top 40 radio. And so, I was an obsessive listener to pop music and a follower of the Billboard charts and that kind of a thing. And Billy Joel, for those of us of our ilk, was an inescapable presence. And I certainly enjoyed him a lot. Although I didn't really think of him as an obsession, nor Bruce Springsteen for that matter. I had older cousins who really were serious Springsteen fans. And then at some point in high school, I just sort of had this epiphany where I realized that this was a very exciting person and that I wanted to be a part of this larger drama that we're all participating in. And of course, that's what's the great thing about pop music, is that it creates, kind of communities. And when I went off to Tufts and I did a thesis there, and which I tried to put Springsteen in the wider context of American history, to see him as the heir of Walt Whitman and Giant Steinbeck and so on, and ultimately wrote a book about him that has just been reissued actually in a third edition. It's called Born in the USA. But the book came about in kind of a funny way, because I had pitched a project to an editor who turned me down because he said that his bailiwick, his area, was regional studies, and what I was proposing was not really a regional book, and therefore he wasn't in a position to say yes. And of course that was understandable, and it just got me thinking, not really actively, just sort of passively, about what I could do for someone like him. And this project just sort of snapped into place very quickly. I had actually thought about doing a Billy Joel book years ago, had sort of put it aside, and suddenly, and I think we can all intuitively understand that these guys have a lot in common. I mean, they were born within 6 months of each other. One was born east of the city. One was born southwest of the city. They signed to Columbia Records that within months of each other. They issued their first records within months of each other. They hit the big after having a couple of records that didn't do well. They hit the big time within a year or two of each other. They both married models. So there is a way in which they led a remarkable sort of parallel life. But above and beyond that, I was sort of interested in the way in which they represented a specific cultural ecosystem that they were both part of. Those of us of the rock and roll generation, we don't really think of Greater New York as the sort of a cultural hotbed. Certainly, the music business has always been centered in New York. But when we think about rock and roll, we think about the Mississippi Delta, or we think about Bob Dylan coming from the hinterland. We don't think about Long Island or the Bronx. But as I began to look into this, I began to realize that in fact there really is a very rich tradition, and it does have a distinctive style, and it goes back to the very beginnings of popular music as an entertainment genre. With someone like Irving Berlin, who was a Russian Jew who comes to the city, writes hit songs over a period of years, sort of has a career, and it sort of goes forward from there. Whether you're talking about someone like Frank Sinatra, or whether you're talking about Dion DiMucci, coming out of the Bronx in the early '60s, or all the way, all the way through the Love and Spoonful, the Shore Sound that out of Asbury Park, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl was a #1 record in the early '70s. So these guys actually didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of somewhere pretty specific, and it's really reflected in their musical styles, but it's also reflected in the values that they came of age with.
Well, I mean, they came across to us. And again, like you, I have humble origins. My dad was a crane operator, and since you lived in Port Washington, across from Bar Beach, which is now a golf course, that was a large sand mine there. And my father went to work there at age 20. He spent 40 plus years there. Started as a laborer. He was a crane operator, and then he was a dispatcher where he weighed the sand coming out of the trucks. They were loaded by conveyor belt. And I grew up in that town. And you may remember Ghost Motorcycle. Do you remember Ghost Motorcycle, sir? I don't know when you joined. Okay, so that went out of business in 1995. But from 1953 to 1995, my uncle Sal DeFeo, a decorated World War II veteran, had a motorcycle shop in Port Washington, and a frequent visitor to that shop was Billy Joel. And so I met Billy Joel for the first time as an impressionable 18-year-old on Main Street in Port Washington, across from Finn McCool's, is where my uncle's motorcycle shop was. And Billy would come in there. He could not have been nicer to the people there. And of course, he told us a story about how he drank shoe polish. He was very depressed, almost committed suicide. And when he finally broke out and made it, he made a solemn promise to himself that he would always be cordial to his fans. And he was certainly that way at age 33, and he looks that way at age 75. But why, though? Why did these guys, who are rock and roll Hall of Famers, superstars, how did they come across more regular than their 80s contemporaries?
Well, that's an interesting question. And, I think part of that goes to their backgrounds as well. I mean, I'm kind of interested hearing you talk about your background in Port Washington, because although I only lived there for a brief time, I know enough to know that it's a fairly affluent town overall. And so living the way that you did, and for that matter, the way that I did, I mean, there is a little bit of a pressing your nose against the glass a bit. And
well, no, not a little bit, sir. I grew up in a town where my contemporaries were driving around in BMWs.
Yeah.
My dad was making $33,000 a year working the crane. But let me tell you something about that town, and I think you'll appreciate this. I was blessed to be in that town because they had a great public school system.
Yes.
And so that public school system plus my grades got me into Tufts. And I had to borrow a lot of money to go through Tufts, but that was really how my career started. And I'm a direct beneficiary of that wonderful public school system in Port Washington.
It was very memorable for me as well. And this is sort of relevant for thinking about Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel, because we think of them as kind of the avatars of upward mobility, which of course they were. But one of the surprising things I learned when I started working on this book is that they're actually products of downward mobility, that their families experienced significant setbacks in the generation before they were born. And that experience really did cast a shadow on their childhoods that lingered for a long time. And so they had that vector, that grounding that's part of their story. But at the same time, they were born at a remarkably fortuitous moment. I mean, they were born at like the exact point of the baby boom when things are really starting to, take off. And you you and I, of course, went to Tufts and we value our educations, but they came of age at a time when you could actually contemplate not getting a college education. Not that it was necessarily good advice or that their families were happy about the choices they made, but there was enough room in the society, there was enough room in the record business, there was enough room for these incredibly passionate, devoted people, to do what they most wanted to do. And that to a certain extent, I mean, there are always people like that. There will always be people like that. But they were also very lucky in terms of the circumstances of the environment in which they came of age.
Well said. Let's go to Billy Joel for a second. Man, he'll be mad at me for saying this. I'm going to say it though. I feel like he was the less popular of the two for some reason, even though his songs are prolific and he has great popularity today. But growing up in the 80s, and you even described this in the book, the favored son was Bruce Springsteen. If I'm wrong about that, please tell me I'm wrong. But if I am right about that, can you give me some insight, sir, as to why I'm right about that? What did you think was going on there?
Well, in a narrow sense, you're wrong in that I think Billy Joel has had more hits and sold more records if you total it up, overall. And even in their moments in the 70s, I mean, Springsteen was not really a pop star. Billy Joel really was a pop star. But in a more important sense, I think that you're right. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I mean, some of them, reflect, I think. I think one of the reasons for this is the nature of rock critics and the media that grew up around them, which came of age at around the same time. And you know, Bruce Springsteen, is somebody who had pretty impressive social skills from the very beginning. Billy Joel, I think, had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder from the very beginning, notwithstanding, the encounters like the one you described. Springsteen also had the great fortune of encountering John Landau early in his career, who, basically steered his education and, helped him, I think, manage. And of course, he was a part of the rock critic establishment. So Springsteen was a critical darling, from the outset in a way that Billy Joel wasn't. And Joel, I think, that chip on his shoulder, hurt him in terms of his image management. I think that's true to this day. I mean, I get a little bit impatient sometimes when I listen to Bruce Springsteen because I feel like every sentence that comes out of his mouth has been burnished within an inch of its life. Like he's very sort of self-conscious and careful and so on. And, Billy Joel, I think, has, spoken from the cuff a little bit more to the point of making, mistakes like reading bad reviews from the stage, when he's sort of upset about it. I do think that overall, Joel is the better musician. He has a classical training. His songs are deceptively complex. Springsteen, I think, is the better writer, in terms of lyrics and storytelling, which of course is more accessible to sort of print media folks. I always say that if they had been born in an earlier generation, Billy Joel would have been writing songs for Broadway, and Bruce Springsteen would have been a short story writer in magazines. So to a certain extent, it reflects their sensibilities. It reflects the establishment of which they came of age, and it reflects the kind of work they've done.
Favorite Billy Joel song?
That's a tough one. I really like I'm not Piano Man. I mean, Captain Jack. If you're going back early, I think that a song like River of Dreams is, at the 20 years later. I mean, he produced consistently good work over a period of time, and maybe we'll talk about his decision to stop and what that reflects. But what's really marvelous about Billy Joel, I think, is the way in which he is a tremendous gifted mimic, and I mean that in terms of, I mean, he does a mean version of Born to Run, which I'm sure you've heard, but he is able to sort of capture the essence of earlier generations of pop performers and yet sort of put a top spin on it. A River of Dreams is a great example of that because he does this doo-wop thing, the tokens, the lion sleeps tonight kind of a thing, but then he imbues it with this meditation about middle age, and so he just adds a whole other dimension to this catchy pop tune. That's really his extraordinary gift, I think.
So I got to ask the same question. Favorite song for Bruce Springsteen. Then I want to get into why Billy stopped writing. I think it's a great topic, and you do address it. What's your favorite Bruce Springsteen song?
Well, it's funny. My favorite Bruce Springsteen songs, and I feel almost guilty saying this because it sounds like I'm a little bit fussy or too much of an inside dopester. But I think my favorite Bruce Springsteen song is "This Hard Land," which he wrote around the time of Nebraska, but never actually ended up making an album until he put it on sort of greatest hits. It's like a beautiful distillation, I think, of his entire vision. In terms of hope and sorrow and all that kind of stuff. I also am deeply fond of the song that he wrote for his mother, "The Wish." Springsteen wrote so many songs from his father, and of course that's a great sort of saga. But the depth of the affection that he shows for his mother, who was his Italian mother, the light of his life, and that expressive Italian Catholicism, which I'm sure you know well, was such a big part of what made him the great artist that he is.
And why did Billy stop writing?
Well, at one level, I think it's as simple as a matter of not enjoying it. I mean, he has often referred to the piano as that beast with 88 teeth, and I think we all know people that for whom some writing, whether it's writing music or writing words, is torture, and it's hard to do. And so I think that was part of it. I think part of it is that a perception on his part that maybe the quality of the work might have been declining. And I think overall, I think you can make a case for that. I mean, for me, the irony, and I talk about this in the book, the irony of Billy Joel is that he's at his weakest, in my view, when he just tries to do straight rock, when he isn't trying to invoke, adapt, allude to sort of earlier generations. Springsteen, his work, I wouldn't say has gotten better at time, and indeed, I think in some ways it's gotten weaker. But he has a different makeup. I think he has a deep need for this, and I think he values work for the sake of working in an important sense, because clearly he's not doing it for the money at this point, and he doesn't have the platform that he once did. It's just that many of us have. I mean, we just don't know what to do but work. It's the source of value and meaning in our lives, even if it's not necessarily immediately remunerative or or something that has a clear payoff in another sense as well.
Your book made me think of something I was dying to ask you, which is probably why I invited you on. So this is the central question. So I want you to think about the answer before you respond. Okay. We both are attracted to musicians and music. We both like songs. I'm sure you have your own playlist on your phone or your car, as do I. And yet we also know there are thousands, if not millions, of unbelievably good singers, talented songwriters. They never break out. They never turn into iconic figures. Yet the two men that you're writing about, they do. And they do for different reasons. And I guess this is a Simon Cowell question. What is the X factor that you look at? Or what do you think knock them into the stratosphere? And yet there's thousands of other people that could probably have the scale and range of Billy Joel's voice and perhaps even be as good of a songwriter, couldn't get there.
Well, there are two necessary but insufficient initial answers to that question. The first, which is perhaps the least satisfying but must be said, especially in the context of the way you're framing the question, is that they were lucky. I mean, luck is always a factor in the outcome of careers, and it seems impossible to ignore that in their case. The second answer is that I think one can say that these were, objectively speaking, unusually talented people. I mean, they as we talked about a lot with Joel, I mean, his ability to craft a hook, a catchy tune, is, is demonstrably attractive because he was able to do it over a period of time. I mean, in pop music, you can cruise for a while, but your chance in the spotlight is brief unless you've really got something to say. And Springsteen, of course, as a writer, as a kind of proto literary figure, although again one with a great musical, you know, background and a sound that he forged. So anyway, so on one hand you could say that they're lucky. On the other hand, you could say that hey, they're really great. But I think the real answer to your question, actually, and there's four parts. The third part is again the moment in which they arrived. They arrived when there was an infrastructure in place where they could succeed. There was a fat and happy record business that was willing to underwrite these guys for a few years and have a few misses until they found their way. That's not there anymore. They could and did tour for years to support their records. So, part of their luck is the moment in which they arrived. I mean, if you assume that they'd be successful today, and I'm not sure they would, but if you assume they did, it would happen differently. It would have to happen differently. But the last and perhaps the most important, or at least for lack of a better term, original answer I can give you to the question is that I think that both of these guys, and this goes to the title of the book, were able to compellingly embody an American myth of upward mobility about which they had some sense of self-consciousness and were able to articulate for a generation of people who could really relate to it on some visceral level.
No
and I think that people really responded to that and still do.
No question. And this is a little bit of a follow-up question, but when I think of Billy Joel and I think of Bruce Springsteen, I think of a celebration of America. It's a gritty America. It's an aspirational, like you say, upward mobile America. There's a sweetness to Glory Days, and there's a sadness to Allentown. But they're both capturing something about the American spirit of perseverance and trying to reach your dreams. Am I getting that right, sir?
I think you are getting it right. And there's a crucial ingredient here of love and loyalty. They love the country. They're loyal to the country, and it's precisely because that love and loyalty is so palpable that they have a certain kind of credibility or seriousness when they're critical of it. It's just that much more compelling and believable. When Billy Joel talks about Allentown in 1980, or when Springsteen, talks about the river. I mean, that's what makes the tragedy all the more painful. And on the other hand, that's what makes a song like "Born in the USA" so ultimately ennobling. I mean, I don't think Lee Iacocca was necessarily wrong to think that this could make a good Chrysler, because what he sensed correctly is that it's a song about resilience, and it's a song about
coming
hope.
back.
Yeah.
Look, the '80s were about the American renewal, right? And so that captured the essence of all that. Before I let you go, you published another brilliant book in 2023 called The American Dream. How do you view that book now? Tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, actually, that book came out in 2003. That's goes back a way.
I meant to say 2003. I'm sorry, I said 23.
That's a book. You won't be surprised to hear that came out of my own experience. It's not in any way autobiographical, but one of the points I was trying to make in that book, and I think it's important in terms of the contemporary conversation, is that people tend to think that the American dream consists entirely of this notion of economic upward mobility. Of course, that's a big part of the story, going back to Benjamin Franklin. But that's not the only American dream, right? The American dream was a dream of religious freedom for the Puritans. It was a dream of political independence for the Founding Fathers. It was a dream of equality in terms of Martin Luther King. It was a dream of home ownership, which was such a big part of the drama of growing up in Greater New York. I think that we need to remember that. One of the and this is something I'm struggling with even in my own work now, is that you and I and people our age came of age when there was a mythology that still felt available to us. The mythology of the American dream, the mythology of the
No, yeah.
frontier. John Kennedy could talk about the space age in the context of covered wagons. The myth of the good war. Whether the good war was to end slavery or whether the good war was to defeat the Nazis. One of the difficult, dare I say, tragic aspects of contemporary life are those myths have been really hit hard, and that's a complicated matter. I don't want to start pointing fingers, but the reality is that we can no longer unselfconsciously invoke them as easily as we once could, and that I think makes people like Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen all the more precious to us,
No
even
question.
as we try to reimagine an American future that is grounded in what we love and what we're loyal to.
Okay, it's beautifully said. We're down to the point of the podcast. I call it the 5 famous words for my podcast. Me and my producer, we come up with 5 ideas, words, phrases. We ask the author to react to them. You can give me a sentence or a word. Let's start with Scorsese.
Scorsese is a great tortured exponent of the American dream and all its glory and squalor.
Yeah, of course. And what we're talking about, Jim and I, is Martin Scorsese, the Academy Award-winning film director, who is about to do a biopic on Frank Sinatra. So that'll be interesting. We'll see what happens there. I'm going to say 1980. You say what?
1980 is a turning point of a society that is preparing to enter Indian summer. It has been beset by doubt. There are dark shadows in the land, but there's also a sense of hope on the horizon. That's inaugurated by Reagan's election and a bunch of other things that are following in its wake.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because the New York Times in 1980, I was age 16. They wrote, "Is America able to recover from the malaise that Jimmy Carter talked about?" Time magazine wrote an essay called "The American Renewal," what we needed to do. And 2 or 3 years later, we came out of the recession and felt pretty good about ourselves. And of course, we had things like Top Gun in the movie theaters, which was, uber patriotic. The American dream, Jim. I say the words, the American dream. You say what?
Well, let me just back up just a second enough to say that, as it so happens, I've written a book called 1980. It's sort of a chronicle of the year. But in terms of the American dream, it's the myth of my life. It's the organizing principle by which I've understood the way the world works and measured its successes and deficiencies of the country.
The last name Joel. I say Joel. You say what?
The prophet of post-war America.
Okay. I say Springsteen. You say what?
The author of the New Testament.
So it's a treatise on how to live. It's a treatise on.
I think,
and I think on who we are.
Yeah, both of those things, and again, you and I are the same age, and I think one of the more powerful aspects of this, and I'd be interested to get your reaction to it. Springsteen is a dozen years older than I am, and I've always kind of viewed him as a kind of big brother that I never had, in terms of this was a guy who shows us how to mess up a relationship, how not to mess up a relationship, how to grow old gracefully, how to express patriotic dissent. I mean, there is a way in which he is just such a powerful model and exemplar, not necessarily in a like do it this way, not that way, but dramatizing the consequences of the choices that people make.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I mean, I'm fans of both, and I have a lot of respect for you, sir. The book is outstanding. The title of the book is Bridge and Tunnel Boys. I really love that title. The title is Bridge and Tunnel Boys. Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, and the metropolitan sound of the 21st century. Jim, thank you for joining us today on Open Book.
It was a real pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.